She was the kind of girl who never stood out in a crowd. Her clothes were simple, her hair always tied back, and her shoes were the same worn-out pair she had used for years. But whenever she held her old violin, something inside her changed. The world around her seemed to disappear, and all that remained was the music flowing through her fingers. She had learned to play the violin when she was very young, using an instrument that once belonged to her grandfather. It wasn't fancy, not even close. The wood was scratched, the strings were dull, and the bow had seen better days. But to her, it was her most precious thing. Every time she touched it, she felt connected to something deep, a feeling of peace and purpose she couldn't find anywhere else. Most evenings, she would sit near the edge of the small town park and play softly. Children passed by chasing each other. People walked their dogs, and old men sat on benches watching. Some stopped to listen for a moment, nodding politely before moving on. But others weren't so kind. There were always a few who would laugh or whisper things loud enough for her to hear. "She thinks she's a real musician," one would say. "Just noise," another would add, pretending to cover their ears. Every word stung, but she tried not to show it. She would smile faintly and keep playing, her bow trembling slightly at first, then finding its rhythm again. She wasn't doing it for them. She was doing it because it was the only time she felt alive. At home, things weren't easy either. Her mother worked long hours at a laundry shop, and her younger brother often complained about how they barely had enough to eat. There wasn't much room for dreams in a house like theirs. Still, she found a way to practice every night after dinner. She would wait until everyone fell asleep, then sit by the window with her violin and play softly, letting the notes fill the dark room. One day, while walking back from the park, she saw a poster pasted on the wall near the grocery store. It was slightly torn at the corner, but the words were still clear: "Town Music Talent Show, open for all." Her heart started beating faster. For a moment, she just stared at the poster, unable to move. Could she? The thought both excited and scared her. She knew the kind of people who would be there: kids from private schools with polished instruments and trained teachers guiding them. She had none of that. Still, the idea stayed with her all day. Even when she was washing dishes or folding clothes, she kept thinking about it. That night, she took her violin out of its case and sat quietly, the moonlight falling across her hands. "Maybe this is my chance," she whispered to herself. She spent the next few days trying to find out more about the event. The registration fee was small, but for her, even that was a struggle. She decided to skip her lunch for a week, saving every coin she could. Her mother noticed she wasn't eating much, but when she asked, the girl only smiled and said she wasn't hungry. When she finally paid the fee, the man at the counter looked at her doubtfully. "You sure you want to join?" he asked, glancing at her violin case. She nodded without a word. He shrugged and handed her a slip with her participant number on it. That evening, she returned home with a quiet excitement. But when she told her mother, the reaction wasn't what she hoped for. "Why would you waste time on that?" Her mother sighed. "You should focus on finishing school. Music doesn't feed anyone." The girl didn't argue. She just nodded and went to her room. She understood her mother's worry. Life had never been kind to them. But still, she couldn't let go of the dream. From that night on, she practiced even harder. She played until her fingers hurt, until her arms ached, until she could feel the music moving through her like breath. There were moments when she wanted to give up, especially when she hit the wrong notes again and again. But she always reminded herself why she started. In the park, people noticed her more now. Some of the regulars smiled when they saw her determination, but there were still those who laughed. One afternoon, while she was playing, a group of boys began clapping mockingly, pretending to dance to her tune. One even shouted, "Hey, don't quit your day job." The laughter that followed echoed through the park. She stopped playing for a moment, looking down at her violin. Her hands were shaking. For the first time in a while, she thought about quitting. She could already hear the laughter she would face at the talent show, but then she saw an old woman sitting quietly on a nearby bench. The woman smiled and said softly, "Don't listen to them, child. Play your heart out. They only laugh because they can't understand." Those words stayed with her long after the woman left. That night, she played with even more passion than before. The music filled the little house, rising and falling like waves, carrying her emotions with it. Days passed, and the talent show drew closer. Her nerves grew stronger with each sunrise. The night before the event, she could barely sleep. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, hearing the melody she planned to perform playing over and over in her head. In the morning, she dressed in her simplest clothes, the same ones she always wore when she played. She brushed her hair, tied it neatly, and cleaned her violin carefully with a soft cloth. Her mother didn't say much, just watched her quietly, perhaps realizing that this meant more to her than anything else. Before leaving, she looked around the small home one last time. Her brother was still sleeping and her mother stood by the door. The girl smiled nervously. "I'll try my best," she said. Her mother nodded, a faint smile appearing on her tired face. "I know you will," she whispered. The walk to the town hall felt longer than usual. When she reached, she saw a large crowd gathered. Parents, children, judges, and performers carrying shiny instruments. Some wore elegant clothes, their families cheering them on. She quietly took a seat in the corner, clutching her violin. As she waited for her turn, she listened to others perform. The hall was filled with piano tunes, guitar solos, and even a few singing acts. Every performance was greeted with applause. Each time someone finished, she felt her heart sink a little more. She was just a girl with an old violin and no fancy background. She took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. Her fingers felt cold. When the announcer finally called her name, she froze for a second. Then she stood up slowly and walked toward the stage, her violin held close to her chest. Whispers started in the audience. Someone laughed quietly. "Look at her violin," a voice said. "Is she really going to play with that thing?" Her steps faltered for a moment, but she kept going. On stage, the bright lights blinded her for a second. She looked down at her trembling hands and took another deep breath. The microphone picked up the faint sound of her heartbeat. She closed her eyes for a moment and thought of all the evenings she had spent playing in the park, all the times she had been laughed at, all the nights she had dreamed of proving herself. This was her chance, maybe her only one. When she finally lifted the violin and placed it under her chin, the crowd went quiet, not out of respect but curiosity. They wanted to see if she would make a fool of herself. The first note that came out was soft, almost fragile. Her bow slipped a little. Someone in the back chuckled, but she ignored it. She closed her eyes again and began to play the way she always did, with feeling. The sound grew steadier, clearer. The hall began to fill with the melody she had practiced for weeks. The same song she played in the park, the one that carried all her hopes and pain. Her body moved gently with the rhythm, her face calm but her eyes shining with emotion. For those few minutes she forgot about the crowd, the laughter, the fear. There was only her and the music. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. Every note told her story. When the final note faded into silence, she slowly lowered her bow. The hall was still. For a moment no one spoke. The girl looked down, unsure of what to think. Then somewhere in the crowd someone began to clap. Another followed, and then another. Soon the whole room filled with applause. She stood there, frozen, her eyes wide with disbelief. For the first time in her life, people weren't laughing at her. They were clapping for her. And deep inside, she knew this was only the beginning. The sound of applause echoed in her ears long after she left the stage. It didn't feel real. For a moment she thought maybe she was dreaming. But as she stepped down, the faces around her told her otherwise. The same people who had laughed before were now smiling, clapping, even nodding in respect. She walked backstage, still holding her violin tightly, afraid that if she let go, the moment would slip away. Her hands were trembling, not from fear this time, but from disbelief. A few other performers came up to her, some offering polite words, others just giving her quiet looks of surprise. She didn't know what to say back. She only managed a small thank you before finding a corner to sit down. Her heart was still beating fast. She tried to replay every note in her mind, wondering if she had really played that well or if the audience had just been kind. But deep down she knew something had changed. For the first time she had been heard. When the event ended, she didn't wait to hear the results. She slipped out quietly, stepping into the cool night air. The streets were almost empty, and the lights from the town hall faded behind her. As she walked home, she couldn't stop smiling. Her fingers brushed against the violin case as if it were a lucky charm. At home, her mother was waiting. "You're late," she said softly, but her voice wasn't sharp. "How did it go?" Children were sitting in groups, some playing flutes, others strumming guitars. The man welcomed her and introduced her to the children. "This is your new teacher," he said proudly. The kids looked at her curiously. Some smiled, some whispered to each other. She smiled back nervously. "Hello," she said. "I'm happy to be here." Teaching wasn't easy at first. The children were full of energy, often talking or laughing instead of listening. Some didn't have proper instruments. Others got frustrated when they couldn't play the right notes. But she didn't give up. She remembered her own struggles, the times she had wanted to quit, and used that to guide them. "Music isn't about being perfect," she told them one day. "It's about how it makes you feel. Close your eyes and play like you're telling someone your story." Slowly, the kids began to change. They started practicing more seriously, and their confidence grew. The music center filled with warmth, laughter, and melody. Months passed, and her small group of students became like family to her. Some of them came from broken homes, others from families that couldn't afford much. But in that room, none of it mattered. They all shared the same love for music. Every evening, after class, she would walk to the nearby park and play her violin under the streetlights. Sometimes people stopped to listen. Sometimes they just walked by. But it didn't matter to her anymore. She played because it brought her peace. One day, while she was playing, a man with a camera approached her. He introduced himself as a local journalist. "I've heard about your music program," he said. "People say you're doing something wonderful for the children. Would you mind if I wrote about it?" She hesitated. "I don't know if it's worth writing about," she said shyly. He smiled. "I think it is. You turned your struggle into something beautiful. People should hear that." A week later, her story appeared in the local newspaper. The headline read, "Young violinist inspires children through music." Her mother bought 5 copies. The students proudly showed it to everyone who visited the center. After the article was published, more children began joining. The little music center started to grow. Donations came in, small ones at first, then bigger ones from kind strangers who read her story. They were able to buy new instruments and fix the classroom walls. But even as things improved, she never let success change her. She still traveled by bus every day, still practiced late at night, still kept her old violin even though she could now afford a new one. Sometimes she visited her old town. She would go to the park where she used to play. The same benches were there, though many faces had changed. Some of the same people who once laughed at her now greeted her warmly. "Didn't you used to play here?" one shopkeeper asked with a smile. "Yes," she said, smiling back. "This is where it all began." He nodded. "I remember. You've come a long way." Hearing those words filled her heart. Not with pride, but with gratitude. Years passed and her students continued to grow. Some of them went on to win competitions. Others simply kept music in their lives as a comfort, just as she once did. The little girl who had once been laughed at in the park had become a teacher who gave others courage. But even as time moved forward, she never forgot the night that changed everything. The night she walked onto a stage, shaking with fear, and left it surrounded by applause. One evening, after finishing class, she sat by the window of the music center, watching the sunset. The light turned golden, reflecting off her violin. She thought about her journey, every hardship, every doubt, every moment she had wanted to give up. Then she smiled softly and whispered, "It was all worth it." She began to play, a soft, gentle tune that drifted through the quiet streets. Children's laughter could be heard in the distance, mixing with the notes of her violin. People passing by stopped to listen. Some recognized her face from the newspaper. Others were just drawn by the beauty of her music. She didn't play for fame, not for praise, but for the simple joy of it. Every note carried a story of a girl who had once been mocked, but who chose to rise above it all. Her music had once been her escape, but now it was her gift to others. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, she closed her eyes and smiled, feeling at peace with where life had brought her. Somewhere deep inside, she knew her journey was far from over. There were still more songs to play, more hearts to touch, and more stories to tell. But for now, as the night settled around her and the first stars appeared, she was content. She looked at her violin one last time before putting it away for the night. The wood was still scratched, the strings still slightly worn, but to her it was more beautiful than ever. It wasn't just an instrument. It was a reminder of everything she had overcome. And as she turned off the light and closed the door behind her, the sound of her music lingered in the air, soft, hopeful, and full of life. The years rolled by quietly. each one filled with music, laughter, and new faces. The little music center that once struggled to survive had now become a place filled with hope. Children came from nearby towns carrying small dreams and big hearts, ready to learn from the young woman who once played alone in a park. Her students adored her. They said she had a way of making even the simplest melody sound like magic. She never shouted, never scolded. When a student made a mistake, she smiled and said, "Let's try again." Her patience became her greatest strength, and her kindness made everyone around her feel seen. But even as everything seemed to be going well, she sometimes found herself thinking about her old dream, the one she had buried quietly beneath her new life. She had always wanted to perform on a big stage, to play in front of people who loved music as deeply as she did. She had given that dream up when she began teaching, believing that her place was to guide others. One evening, after class, she stayed behind in the empty music room. The children's laughter had faded, the lights were dim, and only her violin kept her company. She began to play softly, not for anyone, not for a competition, just for herself. As the sound filled the room, she felt that same fire she used to feel when she was younger, the hunger to be heard, to share something bigger. The music seemed to reach deep inside her, reminding her of the girl who once stood alone on a stage, trembling with fear and courage at the same time. She stopped playing and looked at her reflection in the window. She was older now, wiser perhaps, but the dream was still there, quietly waiting. A few days later, her teacher from the academy called unexpectedly. "There's an upcoming national music competition," she said. "It's open to solo performers. I think you should try." The woman hesitated. "I haven't performed in years," she said softly. "Exactly," her teacher replied. "It's time you reminded the world what you can do." That night she couldn't sleep. She sat by her bedside, turning the idea over and over in her mind. She was afraid, not of failing, but of stepping away from the simple life she had built. What if she wasn't good enough anymore? What if she had lost her touch? But deep inside, something whispered, "You'll never know unless you try." The next morning, she registered for the competition. It would be held in the capital city, a place she had never been before. The thought of performing there made her heart race with both excitement and fear. Her students were the first to find out. When she told them, their eyes lit up. "You have to go, miss," one of them said eagerly. "You always tell us not to be afraid of trying. Now it's your turn." Their support gave her courage. She spent the next few weeks preparing after classes, staying late at the center to practice. Sometimes the children stayed too, sitting quietly in the corner and listening. They said her music sounded different this time, deeper, stronger. Her mother noticed it too. "You look alive again," she said one evening, smiling softly. "It's good to see you dreaming again." As the day of the competition approached, nerves began to creep in. She had performed before, but this was different. This time, people from all over the country would be there. Professional musicians, judges, critics, and all watching. When she arrived at the venue, her hands were shaking. The hall was enormous, filled with hundreds of seats and bright lights. The other contestants looked confident, dressed in fine clothes, carrying expensive instruments. She stood quietly in a corner, clutching her old violin. For a moment, doubt hit her like a wave. She felt small, out of place. But then she remembered something her first teacher had told her long ago. Music isn't about what you have, it's about what you give. She took a deep breath and whispered to herself, "I'll just play from the heart." When her name was called, she walked to the stage slowly. The audience murmured softly, curious about the woman with the old violin. Some probably expected little from her. She closed her eyes for a few seconds before starting. The first note that came out was soft, gentle but full of feeling. Her bow moved with grace, her hands steady now. The melody began to rise, carrying the years of struggle, the quiet nights of practice, the laughter of her students, and the love of her mother. As she played, the hall fell silent. Every sound, every vibration seemed to pull the listeners deeper into her world. It wasn't about speed or skill, it was about truth. The music spoke of pain and healing, of failure and faith. By the time the final note faded, the room stayed still for a few seconds. Then, like a wave, applause filled the hall, loud, thunderous, rising higher and higher. Tears filled her eyes as she lowered her bow. She bowed deeply, her heart overflowing with gratitude. For years she had helped others find courage through music. Now it was her own turn. After the performance, a few of the judges approached her backstage. One of them said, "Your playing reminded me why music exists, not to impress but to touch hearts." She smiled through tears. "Thank you," she whispered. When the results were announced later that evening, she didn't expect much. She sat quietly, hands clasped together, listening as names were called. Then suddenly she heard her own. She had won first place. The applause rose again, but this time she didn't hear much of it. All she could feel was the weight of the journey that had brought her here, from a lonely park to a national stage. She lifted the trophy, not as a prize, but as a symbol, proof that dreams don't fade. They wait patiently for you to believe in them again. When she returned to her town, everyone was waiting. Her students, neighbors, even people who once laughed at her gathered outside the music center. Someone had hung a banner that said, "Welcome home, our star." Her students ran to her, hugging her tightly. "You did it." They shouted. She laughed, tears in her eyes. "No," she said softly. "We did it." That night, the whole neighborhood came together to celebrate. People brought food, music, and laughter filled the streets. For the first time, she saw her small town glowing with pride. Later, when everyone had gone home, she stood outside under the stars with her violin. She played a soft tune, the same one she had played years ago in that park, the song that had started it all. But this time it sounded different. It carried joy, not pain. Her mother came out and stood beside her, listening quietly. "You've made everyone proud," she said. She looked at her mother and smiled. "I just followed the music," she said gently. The next morning, she went back to the music center. The children were already there, eager to hear about her trip. She didn't talk about winning or the applause. Instead, she told them, "The most important thing is not the prize. It's the courage to keep playing even when no one believes in you." They listened carefully, their eyes wide with admiration. To them, she wasn't just a teacher anymore. She was living proof that dreams could come true. As days turned into weeks, more people came to visit her center. Some came to learn music, others just to listen. Her story had begun to spread far beyond the town. She received letters from strangers, from mothers thanking her for inspiring their children, from young people who said her story gave them hope. But despite all the attention, she stayed humble. She still sat with her students, still tuned their instruments one by one, still played her old violin with the same love she always had. Every evening, when the last child left and the center grew quiet, she would stand by the window and look out at the setting sun. She knew she had come far, but she also knew the journey was not over. Music had given her a life she never imagined. It had taught her that sometimes the most beautiful things come from pain, and that even the smallest voice can one day fill a room with silence and awe. She smiled, lifted her violin, and began to play once more. The melody floated out into the golden light, gentle and timeless. And somewhere deep inside, she knew that as long as she had her music, she would never truly be alone again. Months passed after her big win, but her life didn't change in the way most people expected. She didn't chase fame or money. Instead, she returned to her small town, to the same little music center with its peeling walls and creaky chairs. The joy she found in teaching was still the same. Fame had touched her door, but she didn't let it change who she was inside. People from other cities began visiting her center. Journalists came to write about her journey. Music lovers came to meet her, and parents brought their children hoping they could learn from her. But even with all that attention, she never stopped being gentle and humble. When someone praised her, she simply smiled and said, "It's all because of music. It found me when I had nothing." Her students grew in confidence. They no longer just played notes. They played with emotion. They had learned from her that music isn't only about sound, it's about heart. She taught them how to express their feelings through their instruments, how to tell stories without words. One afternoon, while teaching, she received a letter from a well-known music school in the city. They offered her a position as a senior instructor and invited her to move there. It was a big opportunity. Better pay, more recognition, a chance to shape the next generation of musicians on a bigger platform. She sat quietly for a long time, holding the letter in her hands. The idea of moving away was both exciting and painful. She had built everything here, the center, the children's trust, the sense of belonging. But she also knew life doesn't stop growing when you achieve one dream. That night she walked to the old park where she had once played her violin while people laughed at her. The bench was still there, worn and weathered. She sat down, closed her eyes, and listened to the distant hum of the town. Memories filled her heart. The girl she used to be, scared and unsure, playing through her tears. The first student who believed in her, the day she won on that big stage. When she opened her eyes, she whispered softly to herself, "Maybe it's time to take another step." The next morning, she told her mother about the offer. Her mother smiled, though there was a hint of sadness in her eyes. "You've given this place your heart," she said gently. "But the world is calling you now. You should go. The music will guide you, just like it always has." Her students were quiet when she told them she might leave. Some had tears in their eyes. One little girl asked, "If you go, who will teach us?" She knelt down and said softly, "I'll always be your teacher, no matter where I am. And I'll come back. I promise." They believed her because her words always carried truth. A few weeks later, she packed her small bag, carried her old violin, and boarded a train to the city. As the train pulled away, she looked out the window and saw her students waving from the platform. She waved back until they disappeared from view. The city was loud and fast. Tall buildings surrounded her and everything felt new. When she arrived at the music school, she was welcomed warmly. The principal introduced her as a woman whose story touched thousands. At first, she felt out of place again. The other instructors were formally trained, confident and professional. She was simple, quiet, and carried an old violin that looked nothing like the shiny instruments around her. But when she started teaching, everything changed. Her students quickly saw what made her different. She didn't just teach notes and theory. She taught soul. When they played too mechanically, she would stop them and ask, "What were you feeling when you played that?" At first, they didn't understand, but over time, they began to see what she meant. Within months, her classes became the most popular in the school. Students said her lessons made them fall in love with music all over again. Some even stayed after class just to listen to her play. But despite her success, she never stopped missing her small town and her old students. Every night she looked at the pictures they had drawn for her, the ones with little hearts and violins, and she felt a deep warmth inside. One day, she received a message from her old town. Her former students wanted to organize a concert at the music center, a show dedicated to her journey. They wanted her to come back and perform with them. Her eyes filled with tears as she read the message. She immediately agreed. The concert would be held 2 months later, giving her time to prepare. When the day finally arrived, she traveled back home with her violin. The town looked the same but felt different now, full of life, color, and pride. The music center had been repainted, the walls decorated with photos of her and her students. When she entered, the children ran to her, hugging her tightly. "We missed you," they said. "I missed you too," she replied, her eyes shining. That evening, the concert began. The small hall was packed with people, families, neighbors, even strangers from nearby towns. Her students performed one by one, playing with confidence and grace. When her turn came, the room grew silent. She stepped onto the stage, holding the same old violin. She smiled gently, looking at the crowd. "This instrument has been my friend since I was a child," she said. "It has heard my tears, my laughter, and my dreams. Tonight, I'll play for all of you who believed in me when no one else did." The music that followed was pure emotion. Every note carried her story. The pain of being laughed at, the courage to keep going, the joy of finding purpose. As she played, she looked at her students sitting in the front row. Some had tears in their eyes, others smiled proudly. When she finished, the audience stood up, clapping loudly. The sound filled the room, echoing long after she lowered her bow. For a moment, she just stood there, soaking in the warmth of it all. After the performance, people surrounded her, thanking her for inspiring them. One old man said, "You showed us that greatness doesn't come from where you are, it comes from what you believe." She smiled humbly. "Music taught me that," she said. As the crowd began to leave, she walked outside and looked at the night sky. The stars were bright, the same ones she used to look at when she was young. She felt a deep peace in her heart. Her mother came up beside her and said softly, "You've come full circle." She nodded. "Yes," she said. "But this circle isn't an end. It's a beginning." The next morning, she gathered her students in the center. "I want you all to remember something," she told them. "When I was your age, people laughed at me. They thought I wasn't good enough. But I learned something important. What others think doesn't define you. What matters is how much heart you put into what you love." They listened closely, their faces glowing with admiration. She continued, "You might not all become famous musicians, but that's not the point. What matters is that you let music make you better people. Let it teach you patience, courage, and kindness." Before leaving, she placed her old violin on the wall of the center, in a glass case. "This violin has played my journey," she said softly. "Now it will watch over yours." The children clapped, promising to take care of it. As she returned to the city, she felt content. She had not only found success, but had helped others believe in themselves. The girl who once played in front of a mocking crowd had become a symbol of hope. Years later, her story was told in books, documentaries, and songs. But the part she loved most wasn't the fame. It was knowing that somewhere, a child with a dream would hear her story and think, "If she could do it, maybe I can too." And so, her music lived on, not just through melodies, but through people. Every time someone picked up an instrument with trembling hands, every time a child played a note that didn't sound perfect but came from the heart, a little piece of her legacy played along. In the end, that was all she ever wanted, to remind the world that beauty doesn't always start loud. Sometimes it begins quietly, with one person daring to believe when everyone else doubts. That was the real music.